My name is Avery Morgan. I'm 37 years old, and at my grandmother's funeral, my name wasn't even printed in the program. Grace looked me dead in the eye and said there was no room in the pews. Natalie gave the eulogy polished performative perfect, while I sat in the back as if I were some distant acquaintance and not the granddaughter Evelyn trusted most. They thought they'd erased me, that they could rewrite her story before the will was even read. What they didn't know is that I'm the one holding the gavel. Before I tell you how this ended in court, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Have you ever been pushed aside by the very people who should have stood by you? If you felt invisible inside your own family, hit that like button. And if you believe that truth always finds a way, stick around. Because this isn't just about an inheritance, it's about a reckoning. They handed out roses and rehearsed eulogies, but not for me. I wasn't even on the list. The stained glass windows of St. Catherine's filtered the gray light into fractured colors across the pews. The air inside was thick with incense and formal grief. Avery Morgan stepped through the doors without a sound, the soft soles of her black heels barely registering on the marble floor. Heads didn't turn immediately, but murmurs followed. "Who is that?" someone whispered behind a gloved hand. "She looks familiar. I think it's Evelyn's niece, no. The other one." Avery kept her eyes ahead, walking past the polished pews with the kind of presence that demanded no validation. But still she paused at the third row where a plaque read, "Reserved for Family." Grace sat there, straight-backed, her navy sheath dress tailored within an inch of perfection. She didn't move when she saw Avery. "There's no more room," Grace said, coolly, lips barely parting. "You can stand." Avery blinked once slowly. Of course. It wasn't about the seat. It never was. Behind her, Rachel, nervous and soft-eyed as always, shifted. She nudged Ethan and both made a quiet space at the end of the pew. "You should be here," Rachel whispered as Avery sat. "She would have wanted you here." Avery said nothing, only nodded once the way a soldier might acknowledge a comrade after years apart. The organ swelled. Natalie approached the podium, pearls resting perfectly on her collarbone. Her voice floated above the hush, warm, measured, immaculate. "Our mother taught us many things. Grace, order, perseverance." Avery let the words drift past her. She watched instead. Every slight hand gesture, every sideways glance between Natalie and Grace. Ethan's detached posture. The way Rachel wrung her handkerchief. It was all choreography, practiced, purposeful. A performance. And Avery had seen better performances in courtrooms. As the final blessing rang through the nave, Avery stood letting the procession move without her. She didn't reach for a rose. She didn't cry. Her grief wasn't performative. When the congregation filed outside, a brisk breeze tugged at her coat. The sky threatened rain. Grace hugged guests with polished timing. Natalie stood near the estate attorney, their body language too aligned. Rachel lingered behind, fiddling with the strap of her purse. "Avery," she said softly. I didn't know they didn't tell you. You don't have to explain." Avery's tone was smooth. They did what they always do. As Rachel gave a reluctant smile and moved to greet another cousin, Grace passed behind Avery, brushing too close. Her handbag shifted. A sealed envelope slid neatly, almost surgically, into Avery's purse. Avery didn't flinch. She waited. Only when the guests dispersed and the parking lot emptied did she slip the envelope from her bag. Cream-colored. No stamp. No name. She unfolded the note with deliberate fingers. It was Evelyn's handwriting. "If you're reading this, they already began rewriting my story. But you, Avery, know the truth and where it's hidden." Her breath caught, not in surprise, but in confirmation. She had come for closure. She now had a mission. Across the lot, Natalie laughed softly as she shook hands with the estate attorney. They didn't notice Avery watching. They never did. Avery folded the letter silently, eyes fixed on Natalie, who's shaking hands with the estate attorney. "You'll all receive what you deserve," the attorney read. But none of them expected what came next. The scent of old paper and polished wood lingered like a memory in the conference room at Montgomery and Green. Outside, the spring morning filtered in dimly through the heavy curtains, but inside the atmosphere was all shadow. No one spoke above a whisper. Chairs creaked under tension, not weight. Avery sat closest to the far corner, a deliberate choice. From there, she could watch everyone. Natalie perched near the center, one leg crossed, one perfectly manicured hand resting on her knee. Her smile was thin and immobile. Grace sat stiffly beside her, glancing around the room every few seconds like a student waiting for a pop quiz. Ethan leaned against the window ledge with a posture that could be mistaken for boredom. Rachel Ever, the observer, held a pen she didn't use. Attorney Montgomery cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. This is the last will and testament of Evelyn Marjorie Holloway, dated March 14th of this year. Avery's gaze didn't waver. The date was 10 days before the fall. She had noted that. Montgomery continued, his voice even. To my daughters, Natalie Holloway and Grace Holloway, I leave $1 as acknowledgement of our legal relationship and in light of their choices. Natalie's head snapped toward the attorney. What the hell is this? Grace's voice cracked, brittle and sharp. To my nephew, Ethan Holloway, Montgomery read, I leave my collection of rare books and correspondence should he choose to learn from the past, not repeat it. Ethan blinked once, said nothing. To Rachel Holloway, I leave my gratitude and the music box from Vienna. Rachel's lips parted, but she made no sound. And finally, Montgomery paused, glancing at the paper as if to confirm it again, to my granddaughter, Avery Morgan. I leave the remainder of my estate assets, property holdings, and the Evelyn Holloway Trust in its entirety. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Natalie stood slow and seething. This is a joke. Montgomery's brow twitched. It's signed and notarized. She was sick, Natalie snapped. She didn't know what she was doing. Avery manipulated her. I haven't spoken to her in 10 years, Avery said coolly without looking up. That doesn't prove anything. Grace's voice wavered. We need this, needs to be verified. A handwriting expert. A psychiatric evaluation. Something. No one drugged her. Grace, Ethan said mildly. She was clearer than any of us. Grace shot him a look of betrayal. While voices escalated, Rachel's attention drifted to Natalie's phone vibrating softly on the oak table. A flash of a message lit the screen. Natalie tapped a quick reply under the table, her expression untouched. Avery's eyes remained on the will. She caught a footnote. See addendum on file surveillance tapes. To be released upon request by Avery Morgan only. She looked up steady. There's an addendum. Montgomery nodded. Supplemental instruction filed 3 days before Evelyn's passing. Evelyn requested that all internal surveillance footage from her residence in the last 6 months be sealed and released solely to Ms. Morgan upon her request. Natalie laughed once, loud and credulous. You've got to be kidding. That's not how estate law works. No, Avery replied, tone level. But that's how Evelyn did. The room turned tight. No air. No exit. Just stairs flickering, judging unraveling. Grace leaned back, arms crossed. We'll take this to court. You can't just show up and collect everything. Careful, Ethan murmured, but too late. Natalie's palm hit the table with a sharp crack. We'll see what a judge thinks of this circus. Avery replies without looking up. So will I. They called me a fraud, a manipulator. Then the court clerk stood and said, All rise. The Philadelphia Civil Court was already humming when Natalie arrived. Reporters with laminated badges lined the back benches, murmuring into recorders. Lawyers in gray suits whispered behind folders. Somewhere near the third row, someone mentioned Evelyn Holloway's estate and how fast the case had landed on the docket. Natalie adjusted her blazer as she stepped through the heavy double doors, Grace trailing behind with furrowed brows and tight lips. They paused when the clerk seated at the front glanced at the clock and rose. All rise, he called out clearly, tapping the gavel on the oak podium. This court is now in session. Presiding Judge Avery Morgan. The silence that followed cracked like thunder. Natalie's lips parted, then closed. Her jaw moved, but no words came. Grace made a choking sound, half cough, half gasp. Rachel's head jerked toward Ethan, who had already sunk low into his chair. The air became thick, almost gelatinous. Even the press looked confused. Avery entered from the side door, black robes flowing like an executioner's flag, eyes calm, spine impossibly straight. She took the bench without a flicker of triumph. Natalie snapped out of it. This is outrageous. Her attorney stumbled to stand. Your Honor, we request immediate recusal on the grounds of personal interest. And Avery raised a hand. You don't have to request it, she said, voice measured. I've already filed recusal from the bench on this matter. Judge Reynolds will preside within the hour. Natalie blinked, but Avery continued placing a thin black folder on the table before her. I retain authority as administrative judge to authorize supplemental review, particularly when it concerns fraud, coercion, or undue influence. She rose again, stepping down from the bench, and handed the folder to the bailiff. This is a sealed request for federal oversight on the estate challenge. The Justice Department has been notified. A special magistrate will be appointed for discovery review. Someone in the back let out a long breath. The clerk adjusted his microphone. Cameras clicked. Rachel leaned toward the stranger next to her and whispered, She knew. She knew this would happen. Judge Reynolds entered minutes later, a practiced handoff, and the hearing resumed under new leadership. But Avery remained seated to the side, her presence a lighthouse amid a sea of denial. The estate attorney stepped forward, holding up a flash drive. Your Honor, the decedent Evelyn Holloway submitted a video affidavit to this office 48 hours before her death. She was of sound mind and accompanied by 2 witnesses, both licensed professionals. The judge nodded. Play the recording. Evelyn's face filled the screen, older, tired, but unmistakably lucid. If this is being played, it means my will is in dispute, she said. Let me be clear, I was not coerced. I chose to disinherit my daughters because they tried to erase Avery, not just from my will, but from my life. I saw their emails. I heard the calls, and I documented everything. When the lights came back on, no one moved. Grace looked as though she'd swallowed glass. Natalie's expression was unreadable, like a mask slipping out of place. Court recessed shortly after. Outside, the courthouse flashes popped as reporters surged forward. Avery stepped past them, shoulders squared. Judge Morgan, how long have you known about the surveillance evidence? Avery didn't break stride. Long enough. Grace said Evelyn never touched a computer. Then why did I find her encrypted backups in the fireplace? The rain whispered against the stained glass windows of Evelyn's study, each droplet ticking like a clock winding down. The estate was officially Avery's, now on paper at least. In reality, the walls still held the breath of someone else. Dust settled over antique bookshelves. Oil portraits stared down in judgment, and the desk sat like a locked tomb at the center of it all. Avery stood in silence, letting her fingers trace the wood grain of the drawer handles. She'd examined every shelf, every stack of notes, every faded receipt Evelyn left behind. And still nothing definitive. No surveillance footage, no documents proving coercion, just the will and that letter. Until Rachel called. I know I shouldn't be helping you. Her cousin whispered, voice thin over the line, but Evelyn once told me never to trust Grace with the study keys. She kept something in the left drawer, but I don't know what. Avery thanked her quietly and ended the call. The left drawer didn't open normally. There was a slight resistance at the corner, like something braced against it. She retrieved a thin letter opener from the stationery tray and wedged it beneath the panel. With a gentle twist, a soft click broke the silence. Inside, a black external hard drive duct-taped into the hollow, wrapped in a velvet cloth once meant for heirloom jewelry. She stared at it for a long time. Then, without hesitation, slipped it into a sealed envelope and called someone she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Matt, I need a secure remote session. Same encryption protocols as before. He didn't ask questions, only said send it now. While waiting, Avery returned to Evelyn's old planner, leather-bound, handwritten in tight loops. She flipped through April and May from last year. Doctor appointments, book club lunches, one peculiar entry repeated 3 times. Meeting with D. No last name, no address. Grace had testified Evelyn was bedridden by then. The laptop pinged. A secure screen opened with a progress bar. Decrypting contents. One file blinked to life first. A low-res thumbnail. A video. Avery clicked. The camera angle was skewed, positioned behind a bookshelf, perhaps a hidden nanny cam. Evelyn stood near the fireplace, arms folded. Natalie paced like a shark in a suit. You told Derek to threaten the vendor. Evelyn's voice crackled, age-worn but clear. Natalie scoffed. I asked him to encourage a delay. You've always overreacted. You forged the invoices, Evelyn snapped. Natalie froze. I saw the originals, Evelyn continued. And I know what you did to Avery's judicial application. You're being paranoid. No, you filed a complaint to the board, didn't you? Anonymous, unsigned, but very specific. About her father's disbarment. You dredged it up to taint her nomination. Natalie didn't deny it. She just said she was never going to get it anyway. The video cut off. Static. Another ping. A folder labeled Confession EH began to download. Avery didn't open it yet. She stared at the frozen image of Natalie on the screen mid-sneer. Her pulse remained steady, her hands still. Then she whispered, You didn't just steal the inheritance. You stole my seat. She shook as she stood, eyes darting between Grace and Natalie. I have something to say. Under oath. The courtroom had settled into that strange, quiet, only high-profile cases earned buzzing tension beneath a veneer of order. Day 3 of the will contest. Spectators filled every inch of the gallery. Some leaned forward with elbows on knees, others gripped pens like scalpels. Afternoon light sliced through the tall windows, casting long, accusatory shadows across the floor. Judge Sims reviewed a stack of motions at the bench, her expression unreadable but razor-sharp. The attorneys exchanged hushed commentary. Avery remained still, hands clasped a portrait of serenity. But her eyes never left Rachel. Rachel sat in the second row, perched on the edge of her seat. Her hands twisted the hem of her blouse until the thread began to fray. A silent war played out behind her trembling lips. Then, abruptly, she stood. Heads turned. Whispers rippled. She stepped into the aisle. Your Honor? She called out, voice cracking like thawing ice. I need to speak. Judge Sims lifted her gaze. Please approach. Rachel hesitated, then walked with uncertain steps. Her heels clicked against the polished floor like drum beats before a confession. At the bench, she whispered. Sims nodded slowly. Ms. Holloway has requested to be sworn in as a witness, the judge announced. Natalie bolted upright. That's not procedure, she's not on the list. Judge Sims silenced her with a glance. This court will determine what's relevant. Bailiff Avery finally moved just a slight incline of her head, the closest thing to encouragement she'd ever given Rachel. Rachel saw it, clung to it. Right hand raised, voice steadier. Now I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth. She took the witness stand like someone walking to their own reckoning. For years I said nothing. She began looking down at her hands. But Evelyn was more than our grandmother. She was a survivor. She didn't deserve what we did. Gasps echoed. Avery said nothing, but her stillness became louder than any outrage. Rachel inhaled. Natalie had me sign papers. She said it was routine medical documentation for Evelyn's care. But I later found the originals. Evelyn's records had been altered, dates changed, diagnoses exaggerated. Judge Sims leaned forward. Are you suggesting fraud? Yes, Your Honor. Grace's mouth opened in shock, but no sound emerged. Grace told people Avery hadn't spoken to Evelyn in years, that she'd cut ties. That's not true. Rachel continued, eyes glassy now. Evelyn sent birthday cards, emails. I saw them. Grace deleted replies, said Avery was toxic. And the night before Evelyn's hospitalization, Rachel added now, gripping the armrest tightly, I saw Derek in her home office. He was carrying a file box sealed. I don't know what was in it, but afterward, Evelyn kept asking, Where's my folder? Over and over. Silence. Not courtroom silence, judgment. Silence. The kind that shifted air molecules. Judge Sims nodded to the clerk. Issue an order. Derek Holloway is to appear for questioning at the next hearing. Murmurs exploded across the gallery. Natalie turned toward Grace, voice barely audible. "You said you destroyed everything." Grace's face was bone white. I thought I did." Then from the witness stand, Avery spoke softly without even turning to them. "No, you didn't. They expected a ruling. They got a reckoning." The courtroom was quieter than it had ever been. Not silent, just still, as if the room itself held its breath. After 5 days of testimony, exhibits veiled accusations, and an unexpected witness, the gallery now waited for what everyone had come for: judgment. Judge Sims entered from Chambers' robe flowing behind her like a slow tide. She took her seat without a word, scanned the room, and placed her glasses gently atop the folder that held the court's final decision. Avery sat with her hands folded in her lap, face unreadable. Her dark suit was impeccably pressed, her shoulders relaxed. Grace and Natalie across the aisle looked nothing like the polished socialites who had once commandeered family functions. Grace's mascara had begun to smudge. Natalie's hair, once rigid with lacquered precision, now frayed at the edges. They leaned forward as if proximity might change the outcome. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania finds the last will and testament of Avery Morgan to be valid. Judge Sims said, her voice as level as steel. The estate assets, property, and holdings shall pass in full to Ms. Avery Morgan. The room didn't erupt. It inhaled. But Sims wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued adjusting her papers. This court refers the matter of potential financial misconduct, including forged documents and obstruction of estate access, to the district attorney's office. The conduct of Ms. Natalie Holloway and Mr. Derek Holloway will be subject to further investigation. Natalie's mouth opened in disbelief. Grace flinched as if struck. Avery didn't blink. As murmurs began to swirl in the gallery, Grace stood. She walked, no drifted, toward Avery's bench. "Avery," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Can we talk privately? Just for a minute." Avery stood gathering her bag but didn't look at her. "No," she said softly. "Everything worth saying has been said under oath." She turned, heels echoing against the courtroom floor. Reporters surged at the doorway, held at bay only by bailiffs, and a single raised hand from Avery. Judge Morgan, one called out. "Did you always know you'd win?" She paused. "This was never about winning," she said, eyes calm. "It was about correcting a record." Flashes burst like fireworks as she walked into the daylight. Outside the courthouse steps, the press flanked her on both sides. Questions flying. Avery moved past them with the elegance of someone who had nothing left to prove. Then through the crowd, a voice emerged. Judge Morgan Avery turned. A young woman, maybe 21, clutched a leather-bound portfolio with trembling fingers. "I'm a law student," she said, breathless. "Watching this case, you changed my life. I didn't think someone like me could ever stand alone and win." Avery offered a small smile, the kind that began in the eyes before it touched the mouth. "You're never really alone," she said. "You just have to know where to look." She moved on. Later that evening, the estate was quiet. Rain tapped gently against the window panes as Avery walked the familiar halls now legally hers. The study light was dim, casting soft shadows across the desk where it had all started. She opened the drawer, the one she'd once found locked, and placed the external hard drive back inside. Locked it. Slid the key into a velvet pouch and returned it to the bookshelf tucked behind Evelyn's annotated copy of the Federalist Papers. She stood in silence, hand resting lightly on the wood grain. Then she whispered, barely audible to the room, to herself, to someone no longer there. Some truths were never meant for court, just for legacy. The courtroom may have closed, but its echoes lingered far beyond marble walls. Betrayed, erased, and nearly silenced, Avery didn't shout to reclaim her place. She simply walked back into it with undeniable truth in hand. Justice, after all, doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it enters like a judge in black robes, quiet, composed, and impossible to ignore. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. And in the end, it wasn't vengeance that won the day, but legacy.